So I'm going to talk about some concept of training that we imported into this program, and why we do some of the thing indoor, why there is a value in doing some training indoor. Even if you live in Las Vegas, you can ride outside most of the days, and it's not that riding indoor means not riding outdoor. It's actually is a way to balance what you do. Training is all about balance, as we'll see. And and now, because of information we have from training science, and also from the possibility that technology gives us to use devices that can control the power very precisely, I think that we can get something good out of it. I'm not going to tell you that riding inside is better than to climb the Stelvio Pass in Italy. That is, the Stelvio Pass is the Cima copy of the Tour of Italy, so the biggest mountain and the most challenging. And if you have a chance to go to North Italy, you can stay in Bormio and you can climb the both sides. This is the Italian-speaking side, so the one that goes up to Bormio. The back side, you go in the German-speaking side of Italy. So if you speak German, you can stay on the other side, you speak Italian. Food is better on this side, but they're more organized on the other side. So you can pick what you want. So that is basically what cycling is about: is go take your bike yourself, explore nice roads, nice places. Everything outside is better when you're in better shape, because you can be could find the perfect day to climb the Stelvio, but if your condition is not really good for climbing, it's going to be not a very good day, because you're going to suffer every single meter of that climb. So I'm going to start with mention a few things that we can all agree about training. And actually, this is a group where I would like to keep very informal. If anything doesn't make sense, stop me, and we can go over things. So these are a few concepts that I saw over 20 plus years that I would put my money on. But so training is for everybody, based on individual condition and goals. And I don't see almost, as a physician, I started in cardiac rehab. We had very few patients. This was in the early 80s. They were not good candidates for training. Everybody gets better, depending, you need to know where you start from and what the goals are. Unfortunately, training is not an exact science. And in fact, still now, you got different training styles, different coaches train differently, different athletes respond different to different training. If there was only one way to do it right, we would all do the same, and we don't. You can see that at top level, and you can see that at recreational level. There is not a precise model for training, so how we get better? We know that the fatigue and training and the stress of training triggers some responses in the body. Your body gets better, you develop adaptation over time. And now we start to understand what are the biological signals. So what makes your heart get stronger? What makes your muscle get more resilient, to pushing a bigger gear in a long climb? But these biological signals are so complex that training, the more we learn, the more become almost difficult. And I give you an example, like lifting versus aerobic. We got a lot of athletes that run marathon. They still lift weight, and they ask, weightlifting is good for running marathon, or lifting is good for cyclists. If you look at standard science, yes, I would say weightlifting always help, but depending how you use it, which kind of lifting you do, which time of the season, and if the lifting doesn't become so prevalent that impact the way you train on a bike, if you want to be a cyclist, or the run, if you want to be a runner. So there is a balance. But now there are some studies that show that the signaling inside the body between, for example, strengthening and endurance can be causing interferences. And matter of fact, when you do endurance, there is an enzyme that elevates in the body that stimulate the muscle to produce more mitochondria, that are the energy plants that produce energy that allow Cadel Evans to win the Tour de France, or Wiggins this year to win the Tour de France. While when you lift weight, you produce another protein that actually inhibit the one from aerobic. So there is a point above which probably you have to specialize. And an example, if you take the best runner in the world, the Kenyan runners, they don't lift weights. Still, they're the fastest running in the world. As a doctor, I think everybody should lift weights for health reasons, especially if you pass age 35, 40, you want to maintain your muscle mass. But when it's about training, especially at the top level, sometimes things that work better are not the one that you would recommend for general fitness or general health. We know, to make it even more complicated, that every individual responds differently. In fact, there are studies on twins that show that identical twins respond pretty similar to training, but even twins that are not identical could be completely opposite. One responds more to strength training, another one more to endurance training. And we start to understand now the genes that get activated, get upregulated with training, and others that get downregulated. Then on top, to make it even more complicated, we go into psychology. Psychology is complicated by nature because it's the nature of, it's the human nature that make it difficult. But on top of training, we saw that same amount of training on the same subject in a time in which the psychology, say, is in an up mood, is perceived as different, and the benefits are different than when they do exactly the same training program, but they are more stressed, say, for example, at work, or personal stressors. And actually, this is very interesting. You see not only that they perceive the training as different, like harder, they scale that, they rate that effort as harder than the same training they did the last year, but also the benefit, the improvement are not the same. So the brain is also another level where everything got controlled and modulated. And then, environment and health, same training when you have a cold could be too much than when you're completely healthy. So we said that everybody gets better, and for a cyclist, getting better means getting faster. That is pretty much where we test our improvement. You go with the group at the beginning. You may be one of the first guys to get dropped on a climb. Then you start to be in the middle of the pack. Then you're up on the top. Actually, when you're in the top, then you enjoy to be there, so you like to hammer the other ones. So that is the cycle of life in cycling, And so the improvement, but why this improvement happens? So now we know that repetitive training, if you stimulate the body properly, and we'll see what is proper and what sometimes is not proper, make your body adapting to the stress, so the body can change in size, in anatomy, or in function. Typical anatomic changes, lifting, muscle get bigger. So you can see someone that's been lifted because it looks bigger. And there is some correlation between how much muscle you build and how much strength you gain. In an aerobic sport, it's not so easy. You can improve your fitness by 10%, you still look the same. You may lose some weight if you start from a low level of fitness, but some of these adaptations are kind of invisible. But some adaptation happen at any level. The heart get more efficient pumping blood, get bigger. The thickness of the heart muscle is bigger. Lungs don't change in size with training. People think, I got bigger lungs. Normally that doesn't happen, but you move more air, so your lungs learn and your brain how to breathe more efficiently. So for the same amount of air you're moving in and out, instead to breathe 40 times, you may breathe 30 times, but moving more air for each breath. That is much more efficient. Also help to wash out carbon dioxide better. People out of shape, the first thing that they experience when they go for the first run, they're short of breath. They cannot really breathe with the movement. And normally when you talk to big runners, normally the breathing is not their problem. It's more legs that get tired. Same in cycling. When you're out of shape, breathing hard. When you're in good shape, a muscle that can push harder. So the limiting factor can change during your improvement. We need to understand exactly the time and the targets of every training load we do, because if we understand what happened, then we can do the right thing and put the training in a way we can call it as a science. Everybody gets better with exercise. If you take someone out of shape, say just go out every day, do an hour on a bike, there is no doubt getting better. You don't have to be a scientist. Everybody gets better. The problem is when you are close to your physiological maximum, and then you have to be precise, or want to make sure that you get all the benefit for the little time you have. Because pro cyclists probably are the ones that need the least scientific training in one way, because they train 25 hours a week. So one day they go up, one day they go down, one day it's flat, it's crosswind. So that by staying on the bike 25 hours a week, they challenge all the different elements that they need to be trained, the anaerobic power, the lactate tolerance, the aerobic fitness, and so on. But if you have, 3 to 5 hours a week, if you do the same run around the block, you get better for the first 4 or 6 weeks. And then that is the improvement you got. That's it. So then you need to start to change something. If you don't, till you don't understand that, you cannot call training a science. That explains why the model of training and coaching are very different. I mean, I know coaches that were cyclists, so they have their athletes do exactly what they were doing. Work for them, supposed to work for the others. And some of these athletes do fine. Other ones, do race simulation. So go easy, and then 2 days a week, go do a crit. Because the crit, you challenge a little of everything, and then maybe once every so often do a century. That is the model that the Romans were using. The 100-meter runner, they were doing 100 meters. And we know that model of training is very good at the beginning, but then it gives you a fitness that lasts for very short. Because normally you build the top end of your performance without having the basis to support it. So you can stay in a group for a little longer, not because you're fitter cardiovascular, but because you can tolerate more pain, muscle can tolerate more acid, so hydrogen ions level. But then you start to burn out this mechanism, and you don't have much to support it. So if I think that the best way for training and for coaching would be to understand the physiology of the athlete. So this is my athlete. I measure the different energetic mechanisms. So how is it aerobically, how is it anaerobically, how is the muscular strength. And then I look at the model of the most successful athlete in that sport. That is not just for cycling, for swimming or for running or for soccer. So you see, what the best athlete in that sport, which kind of composition in their performance, and then you try to reproduce, to stimulate all of those. So we use what we call the performance model for training. And that's what these classes try to do. So in order to get better, even with different model of training and coaching, I would say that all this model kind of rely to this goes back to 1977. Yakovlev was one of the first sport methodologists. In the 70s, all these people, they developed in a Eastern Bloc. Because, for Eastern Bloc, a lot of money were invested in research to optimize. East Germany is a small country, got a fraction of probably less people than Utah. But they were, challenging US and bigger countries in number of medals. So the only way for them to do that was either take a shortcut, doping. In fact, we learned 30 years later that was part of. The other one was selecting talent. So pick the right person for that sport. And third, optimize their training. So now it's hard to say how much came from one or the other. Probably was a combination of the three factors, because some training was, tolerable from the athlete because they were, pumped up with other stuff. But still, they left a lot of good literature in terms of how the body responds to training and how to optimize performances. Because I said they had a small pool of athletes. Italy, country like Italy, Spain, are kind of the same. Like in Italy, in the United States, you got 2 million people that train for a marathon every year. And 1 million people that complete a marathon every year. Nobody has even close. The rest of the world together is a fraction of this. Still, we didn't win a marathon in an Olympic for 30 years. Why is that? Everybody runs, but very few. So in Italy, maybe we got 3 runners. But when they start to be at that level, they tell you there is a lot of science behind them. They don't do any workout without knowing how much, why the speed, why the interval, and why the number of repetition. When I came to the United States, I was surprised because I was UC Davis, great running program, and I started to interact with the athletic program, and I realized that the pool of athletes is so good that you don't have to bother about being very precise. You train them hard, the one that don't break, probably gonna make the Olympic trial, maybe they go to, and in some sport, that's all you need. Say in sprinting. Sprinting, in the United States, you got the first 3 guys at the trial, they were 3 medalists at the Olympics. Now it's not like that. So the rest of the world is catching up because having fewer athletes, they have to optimize the way they train them. I think if we put a little more science in our training with the pool of athletes we have, we will kill everybody, But still, sometimes when you have too much food, you're not forced to select the best stuff. And so, but the model, this was, as I said, 77, so this goes back 30 plus years. And all we know now about training doesn't change this vision much. So that's the way we got better. You start from a level of fitness. So this is your level of fitness, whatever it is. And you go out, and you do your first run or your first bike ride. At the end of the ride, your ability to perform is actually less. You're tired. So you're actually worse than when you started. After 3 hours, you broke down some glycogen in your muscles, so sugar are lower. Maybe some of the muscle are a little damaged. You lost fluid, you know. The nerve are tired to send signal to the muscle. So you feel tired. In this phase that we call catabolic phase, a lot of hormone kicks in, you know, like what we call flight or fight mechanism. So cortisol and other hormones that tend to help to support the stress. The moment you stop, if you do the right thing, so you take the right food and your body starts to get better. And we call this anabolic phase. So you got other hormone that kicks in. Switch off the stress mechanism, you start the anabolic mechanism. So testosterone, growth hormone, IGF-1, some of these hormones start to go up, and that makes your recovery not only to the point you were before, but you gain a little bit. It's like your body want to prevent to suffer that much the next time. So say, let's try to get a little stronger. And then happen at multiple levels. So muscle level, neuromuscular level. So you're a little better. We call the phase that follow training super compensation. Then if you don't do anything, if you stay on the couch for 1 week, you go back where you were. So you lose everything. That's why training needs to be repeated. But you know, if I'm up here, I do another workout, then I go eventually even higher. So that repeating this model multiple times makes you better. This is the same thing. Catabolic phase, got fatigue, anabolic phase, I get better. So all we learn in the last 30 years support this. There is no real much that goes against that model. You know, in order to the improvement to happen, we need to respect some principle. There are a lot of principles in training science. These are I would say the main ones. Training load has to be increased over time. So the concept or the rule of progressive overload. Like if you do the same thing every time, it's like running around the block every day, helps you at the beginning, and then you don't improve. You have to respect the adaptation time, so recovery is as important as training. That is the #1 problem when training programs fail. I see more athletes that, you know, they think they have a problem with their health because they don't get better, because they don't recover enough, than athletes that don't train enough. Recovery is relatively important, you know, is relatively more important sometimes than training, if they're not balanced. And the reason why recovery is important is because it's during recovery that you get better. You don't get better during training, you get better during recovery. So you have to use both. You have to respect the rule of specificity, which is a challenge for triathletes. So specificity means that if I want to win the Tour de France, sooner or later I have to ride a bike. I can be the best I can in the gym, I can have the core muscle that nobody else has, I can run up and down the hills super fast, but the first time you go on a bike, you're not going to be that good. So if you're a biker, you have to gradually specialize in riding a bike. That doesn't mean the other things are bad, but they have to put in a way that the main focus is the bike. Challenging for triathletes because they have to be good in 3 specialties. And that is very, very difficult to calculate on different athletes. But that's why the best triathlete can never ride as the best cyclist. The best triathlete can never run as the best runner, and the best triathlete cannot swim like the best swimmer. They're missing probably they're fitter. So I would say the best triathlete is probably fitter than the best cyclist because he can run. He can do things the cyclist cannot do. But for cycling, the cyclist is better. And so that is the rule of specificity. Then another rule that has to be respected is the modulation of stimuli that brings into the concept of periodization. So we saw that the body tends to do better when you trigger things at different times, slightly different than if you do the same thing all the time. And we know that for a lot of swimming models. Swimmers that just swim tend to do not as good as swimmers that do intervals, even when you cut the volume by 50%. So volume at that point is not the limiting factor, is how you modulate the stimulus. Then you have to work on individualized plan, because the same training, you know, maybe is good for one athlete, is not good for another. So individualization is important. And you can individualize in two ways. You individualize the training, so like you do completely different things, or you follow a training that you consider well balanced, but then everybody does it at individual intensities based on your physiology. And that's what we do here. And then you have to be consistent. So you have to train, say, at least 3 times a week or more if you want to get some benefit. If you want to be a top athlete, maybe 10, 11 workouts a week. So some of these concepts come into the program that we want to start here. And I give you a little history about it. This goes back a long time ago when I was in Italy. I live in northern Italy, Lake Como, beautiful place in summer for riding a bike, very rainy in winter, and very humid. So I had a lot of people, and when I was living there, I was coaching 13 of the American riders at that time that were pros in the late 80s, early 90s. And, you know, Andy Hamstin, Davis Finney, Ron Kiefel, Jeff Pierce, those people were living in my own town. I was their team doctor, but I was also their trainer. So we had the place, and this guy had to come normally once every 3 weeks to have a lactate test to adjust in their zone. The time we're using heart rate, so we correlate the heart rate to level of lactate. And they had to do an hour of control indoor workout every hour. I was measuring their lactate every 15 minutes. I want to keep in a certain range that I knew that was very good for training. Then sometimes the weather was very bad, so we started to put an extra bike. And we realized sometime, you know, when we're coming out of a block with a lot of indoor, improvement on the bike were huge. Instead to do 5 hours in cool weather, we're doing an hour and a half indoor for 1 week, you know. They were better at the race on the weekend. So I started to do that also with the amateurs, and when I moved to UC Davis, I started to coach a cyclist who was very new to cycling. She was 30. She never rode a bike before, but she started to ride a bike to recover for an ACL injury. And it turned out she was very talented. You know, right away, the first time we tested in the lab, I was double checking the number because I thought that the calibration was off. And so we started coaching her. She was a physician at Stanford, so she didn't have much time for training. And she didn't have, at the beginning, the skill to race on the road. So I said, let's focus on time trial. And she trained 12 hours a week with 1 ride outside a week, and most of the training 12 hours a week done indoor. And she won the Olympic trial. She got 4th in Athens, and most of the training was done indoors. So I said, oh, there is some reason, you know. I knew I was a rower growing up on Lake Como, and at that time we were doing a lot of indoor rowing. You know, Concert as a big program. Concert is one of the company that makes great ergometers, and there are a lot of programs where they do indoor rowing, and you know there is a good correlation between how you perform indoor and what you do outside. And I think cycling is the same. We have been testing cyclists indoor for 30 plus years. So I say, okay, let's try to make, and then I moved to Park City. Park City, you know, is cold. And I started to advertise my practice as a marketing tool, put together 6, 7 Computraining, inviting people to come over at the hospital. We did it through the hospital. And the things start to become popular. Some of these guys start to perform well. We got some success histories over the last 5 years, including national titles and very good results. And so they start to become popular. And then we opened one in Napa because one of our athletes lives in Napa, so he's exported the program in Napa. And now we want to do the same in Las Vegas. But, you know, really, and, you know, over these 5 years, we got a lot of data from improvement before and after. So we got around 12.5% power improvement in 2 blocks, which is kind of, that's 3 months. And across the group, with people that improve 25, 30%, like people like me that train maybe 3 times a week, I have a job. I can train only indoor. And the weekend, sometimes I travel with the team, so I don't have much time either. So the people that train little, they have little time. Indoor, because every minute counts indoor, you get much better. If you're a Cat 1, you know, the group that train 20 plus 5 hours, they do 3 hours indoor, they may improve 4 to 6%. So because they're already, but still, the fact that they were gaining in winter by training that little, I think is So what we try to do is put all the best science we can find on these classes. So every year we had a couple, based on a couple study that show, oh, this is a new thing. And a big thing for the ones of you that have been following training, in the last few years, they keep recognizing value of high intensity training. And you have to put this in the right perspective, because it's not that high intensity is good for everybody and is not good for 12 months a year. But we know for sure that when you don't have much training time and you want to optimize, intensity is the only way to go. And intensity doesn't mean all out. It means to target specific intensity, specific ranges that trigger adaptation. And you want to keep a certain balance between how much time you spend in a different metabolic intensity. So that's what we do, and I'll show you then how we do the lactate test for that. So some of the concepts, training load can be easy, determine, and control. So for me, it's easy to measure, because when I write the workouts, I calculate the minute difference zone, the time, the recovery time. So I got an average intensity for the workout. The time is the same, but I can play with the intensity and with the density. So how much hard versus easy or versus recovery. And that, that's why I use the Computraining, because the Computraining keeps the power steady within a wide range of cadence. So when I say you guys go a low power 3, say for me it's 200 watts, for the next guy is 230, for the lady is 120, we're working metabolically at the same intensity. And if I put 180, the machine for those 3 minutes is keeping 180, even if I drop the cadence or start chatting with the person next to me. The Computraining makes the resistance higher when you drop the cadence, and the resistance lighter when you increase the cadence. So you were sure that it's like prescribing a medication. You want to be sure that you give the right dose. So Computraining makes sure that you give the right dose. You use your own bike. That is the concept of specificity. And I love also spinning classes. I think spinning classes are great to get in shape, the energy of the class. You get the workout, goes by fast, got an instructor who motivates you. But we keep those things even with these classes. The difference with the spinning classes on some cyclists could be hard on the knees. The way the spinning bikes are built with the heavy freewheel put a lot of, what we say, eccentric load on the knee. So sometimes cyclists develop knee problems. Plus, they don't use their shoes. The saddle height is not the same. And, cyclists are highly specialized athletes. In pro athletes, they change the chamois, put a new pair of shorts. Sometimes they develop Achilles tendonitis just because they are 2 millimeters higher. So they have to use their plantar flexor. So the fact that you use the bike, and triathletes, they want to spend time in that position. So that allows you to respect the principle of specificity. You use your own intensity. So everybody has a different metabolic profile that is not linear. Like, we've been used to look at percentage of maximum heart rate, percentage of maximum VO2 max. That is good way when you work with the group, but on a single athlete, 70% VO2 max for one athlete is not the same as 70% for another athlete. Marathoner can run a marathon at 90% of their VO2 max. I can probably run at 50, 55% of my VO2 max. That depends more on how your muscles are good in recycling lactate. That's why we use lactate. So lactate, you see the curve, I'll show you curves later, completely different. There are subjects that are very good at the easy intensity. Then when they start to go over a certain point, lactate goes up. Other people have a flat curve. So that tells us already which kind of athlete you are to deal with. So we individualize the intensity to respect the principle of individualization. Then these blocks are built in a way in the single workout that we kind of build up qualities at a different pace. So strength goes up much quicker in the first phase, base 1, than cardiovascular. Thresholds start to kick in at the end of block 1, and we do very short time, 1 minute, 2 minutes, but multiple times. So by periodizing, by changing the way you do things, we respect the rule of periodization. And then we guarantee the consistency, because when you train with a group, and there are a lot of studies, people tend to be more consistent than when they train on their own. Because maybe you have a friend that picks you up on the way there. So when you commit, it's different than, I had the computer in my garage for 10 years before I started doing these classes. I may use 3 times a year, because every time I was finding something better to do, I realized there was something wrong when I say, maybe I go clean the cat, litter box. And so, that's, if you prefer to do that than to ride a bike in your garage, better find something else. And And so that's why we think that the model has been working wherever we tried. So this is just to scare you a little bit. So in '96, I was at an American College Sport Medicine presentation, and one of the doctors, they're very, very good scientists, came out with this graphic to show all the factors that determine cycling performance. If you look at this thing, and you want to start to build the training based on this, first thing you have to do, you have to take your athlete probably for 1 week at the hospital to do all the things, check the level of enzyme, biopsy the muscle, and do all the things. And you make it even more complicated. So when it's down to cycling or even to running for long endurance, what determines your performance, the only parameter that correlates to your performance is the power at threshold. Just telling that in a very simple way. And then threshold is a concept that is not physiological, but most of us get used to this idea of threshold. There are too many thresholds: lactate threshold, ventilatory threshold, anaerobic threshold, functional threshold. But the concept is around the same, to work at a certain level of intensity where you can stay for a time between 20 minutes to an hour. So the power at threshold is the result of 3 factors. Your VO2 max, so how much oxygen you can deliver to your muscle, so the size of your engine, of your aerobic engine. The fractional utilization of VO2 max, basically which percentage of that VO2 max you can sustain for 20, 30, 40 minutes. And that is not the same for every athlete. So you got 2 athletes with the same VO2 max, but one can use 80% and one maybe 85%. And then the economy. So even if those 2 athletes have the same VO2 max and they can use the same percentage, so they have the same oxygen, one muscle can produce more watts. Like in cycling, you got people that with 1 liter of oxygen, they can produce 80 watts of power. Other people can produce 65. So there is more, but all those 3 translate in the power at threshold. So what we measure the power at threshold. And people ask me, VO2 max is the gold standard. VO2 max is a great test when you want to select athlete. You got, teenagers, you want to see the one that better play soccer or play football instead to ride the bike. You do a VO2 max. When I was in Italy, we're doing a lot of screening. We had a program called Discover Your Talent. And we're testing athletes, 16, 15, 16, 17. And the best soccer player in the country in that age group, they have a VO2 max in the upper 50, low 60s. The best cyclists in the mid 70s to the low 80s. Training can change that by 10, 15%. So if you are 55 when you're 16, you're never going to be a 72 to race the Tour de France. And in Europe, this is a popular demand in the Sport Medicine Institute. Like you have families coming, mom and dad come with the 15, 16, 17-year-olds. He's a cyclist or a soccer player, and he's good at school. In Europe, we don't have scholarship for sport. So it's only academic. So when you are 17, 18, you go to college, you better don't tell anybody you play a sport because they're going to not treat you very well. If you are in medical school, they think that you're not serious about becoming a doctor if you play a sport. Here, you can play a sport, which is a great thing. There, you have to make a decision. At 17, 18, you're good enough, you give a try in a career as a pro, or you go to the university. Almost impossible to do both. So they want to know, 16, 17, is it worth it to stop school to try to be a pro? So we do this test, and I never told anybody, no, you better go back to school, you suck as an athlete. But you give numbers. These are your numbers, you can expect this, get this good. This is where you have to be racing at the Tour de France. This is where you have to be a CAT 1 local pro. And then, the family make the decision. If you see a 6'5" or 6'7" tall guy and he wants to play basketball, you say, oh yeah, you make good for basketball. Because that is a factor that can determine, is a good quality to be tall. I'm 5'9", if I come and say, you know what, I want to be a power forward in an NBA. You don't have to be a sport doctor, better go back to school. The same thing is with aerobic quality. The thing is that you don't know if this guy, this 16-year-old, has a 72 milliliter of oxygen VO2 max per minute per kilo, or he got a 45. So you need to measure. And so in these, I give you 3 examples. Average subject, recreational cyclist, CAT 3 rider, and pro cyclist. You see the VO2 max, 2.5 liter of oxygen is average, 2 to 3 liter per minute is what we measure in average people in their 30s, 40s. CAT 3 is more around 4.5. The pro cyclist is 5.5. So there is definitely, a value in that. The fraction utilization, 70%, 80%, 85% of their VO2 max that can be sustained, say, for an hour. And then how much watt they produce for a liter of oxygen? 70, 75, 80 watts. So you see the end product is much bigger than what the VO2 max would tell you. That's why VO2 max is not a good parameter in established athlete. There is no correlation in VO2 max and performance in professional cyclists. I had, when you say professional, between 70 and 85, but I had athletes that were 85 that never won a race, and I had cyclists that were 74 that won the Tour de France. Because that is only the starting point. But then the other two levels, that's why measuring the power at threshold is much more important in a cyclist or an endurance runner. So this is an example of one of our clients was a triathlete, and we did the lactate test 2 years in a row. And you see that the peak power was the same. It maximized 330 watt, 340 both times. And you see that the heart rate came down, the solid green line, much lower for the same power. Power is on the x-axis. And then you see the lactate shifted to the right. So for the same power, lactate was much lower. And he improved, and we look at the average power in the Ironman. You have around 220 watts and 290 in the Olympic distance. And we have been doing this systematically. It looks in athlete, shifting the lactate curve to the right really almost overtrained them in the sense of not having the anaerobic mechanism kicking in, tend to help them a lot. So we're learning a lot of things. We saw this trend in other athletes too. They tend to use that part of the curve for those distances. This is a lactate curve. So this is a test on a runner. So this runner was running an increasing speed. These are measuring meter per minute. And, every 4 minutes, we stop the runner, take a blood, and we go up. You can see that the lactate stays the same for this runner till this point. So even with a much higher speed, while probably heart rate was going up a lot and VO2 were going up a lot, but lactate is still steady. So lactate, unfortunately, is one of the things where we have some kind of misconcept. When I was going to medical school, the idea was that lactate is a bad thing. Lactate makes your muscle getting sore, and if you produce lactate, basically, you're guilty. There is something wrong. Then in '85, Dr. George Brooks at Berkeley kind of revisited the whole thing and actually came out with the opposite conclusion that lactate is a great fuel, is a way to shuttle energy between muscle, and is actually a way that we use to take acidity out of the muscle into the blood, so then we can eliminate this acidity by breathing harder or by using other muscles that are not working to retransform lactate in sugar. In fact, we know that people that cannot produce lactate, they have a genetic mutation called McArdle syndrome. They are terrible athletes. They hyperventilate even at easy intensity. The lactate doesn't move. So you say, these people have burn in the leg. They can't perform. They hyperventilate, so lactate cannot correlate with that. And so they realized that lactate is not the cause of fatigue, but lactate goes together with fatigue. So since it's very hard to measure acidity in the muscle while you exercise, it's very easy to measure lactate. We know that when lactate goes up, it means that the acidity in your muscle is going up. So it's not the cause, but they go parallel. That's why we use it. And the trend of a good lactate curve is like that, And now, this has been going on for 30 plus years. Now we can correlate different level of lactate to your performance. So in this runner, normally we know they tend to run the marathon 1 millimolar of lactate above the baseline. So you take this level, you add 1 millimolar, and so, okay, this is your pace for a marathon. And you can predict a marathon within a couple minutes. This first point we call lactate threshold, so the first breaking point. This is the marathon threshold. Most of the people get the most benefit of training, aerobic training, between 2.5 and 3 millimolar, with some exception. Then everybody tends to have a second breaking point that we measure with different regression curves, but that is called OBLA, or onset of blood lactate accumulation. That correlates with the functional threshold in cycling. So that's what we use to give you your training zone. So their training zone are calculated using this curve, not based on the percentage. So before this is your zone 1. 3% above, 7% below is your zone 4, so your threshold zone. 10% below that is your zone 3. Here is your zone 2 in between. So base zone 2 is kind of a little more than recovery, but still a easy aerobic. Zone 3 is kind of hard aerobic. That is threshold. Everything that happened above 3% here is zone 5. The other beauty of this is that, when I see your second breaking point in a test, I don't have to take you till you throw up on the bike, because above that is zone 5. So the athletes are not afraid to come back because the lactate is a submaximal effort. And that is an example how lactate changes much more than VO2. VO2 can change 10, 15, 20% in people that start very out. So the margin is not that good. The best machine has a 3-5% noise in measuring VO2 max. This is a lactate of a guy, progression of one of our clients. There was a 53-year-old physician that didn't exercise for 20 years. So the first time he comes, start working at 100 watts, that is a mild intensity. His lactate was already 3 millimolar. Normally in resting condition, lactate is below 2, 2.5. So it was already pushing. In fact, his heart rate was already up in the 125, 130. So that is a really relatively easy power. Then we went up, and see lactate went up like straight up, went up till 10 millimolar of lactate. Heart rate was 160. And you see this trend is completely different than the one we saw in a good runner before. There are no the 3 phases. So when we see this curve, we know that we have to be careful with these athletes. An athlete really have to start out to learn how to use lactate. So we have working his zone. We trying to keep the zone a little low, even lower than what I told you. This is after 3-4 months. Came back, has been training all winter. This was at the end of the second block. You see that at 100 watts, his lactate was 130. Now it was 3, now it's 2. And then he has a breaking point. And basically the breaking point happened around 190. That was where originally he had this maximum. And now he can push 230. The heart rate doesn't change much. The maximum is still 160. So look at that. So the heart rate didn't really change that much. It's just that he was able to recycle lactate better. So he was able to push more. And this was 2 years later, and he started racing bikes. And here the 2 things. You see a curve that looks like a good athlete. Now he's up 330 watts. He went to national master 3 years later. He also lost 20 plus pounds. So not only gained power, but he lost not just on the class. He was also training outside. But the kickoff came with the classes. And the other thing that they really impressed him in this curve, you see the maximum heart rate. Now he's 185. So he pushed to the level that he can stress his arm much higher. Because at the beginning, sometimes your legs give up before you can push your heart. So his maximum heart rate went up, but the whole curve, now he's a competitive cyclist. So, in training, normally when you prescribe training, you prescribe based, when you send a training program to your athlete, you say, okay, this is going to be a 15 hours week, an 18-hour week. So that is the volume. And the volume is important, especially in the early phase of a career, like a young athlete has to do volume to develop the precision of the movement, the skill on the bike, so on. Intensity that we can measure as a speed on the road, on power indoor with the power meter, heart rate, lactate. That is what I think the difference happened. You have to prescribe the right intensity. Then you got other parameters, density, frequency, how many times per week, and recovery. So you need to kind of put everything together. When we test you, we measure a number of things. So when the test we do today, I think we'll test Dr. McKenna. We'll look at your heart rate. We look at how your rate of perceived exertion increases, and then we measure lactate. So by plotting those 3 parameters, we came out with your 5 zones. And these are 3 of the parameters that change when you start to increase the intensity. As I said, we cannot measure the acidosis, but by measuring lactate, we know the lactate goes together. So that's why we test the way we do. And this is the graphic before. So based on your curve, you got your own zones that then use at the classes to follow the workout. Some advantage of power versus heart rate, especially indoor. You can train with heart rate very well. I mean, I use heart rate for 20 years before power. I have no problem. Still have athletes don't have a power meter. We use heart rate. The problem when you want to make every minute working and you start to work interval 2, 3, 4 minutes, the problem with the heart rate, if I tell you, okay, now we go 2 minutes at your heart rate 4, zone 4, takes a minute and a half to go there. If you start too hard, then the heart rate keeps going up. So then you work actually in a zone that is higher. So because the heart rate is around a minute and a half from when you change the intensity to the time you achieve the steady state. Power is immediate. If you go from power 2 to power 3, you increase the resistance of Computraining, boom, you're right there in 5 seconds. And so we don't have to worry about the slow going up and the slow coming down of the heart rate. That's why it's better, is the time to steady state. There are some other advantages. One is the altitude for us at Park City. I test people on the power. We stick to the power in Park City. We had 8 to 12% in Salt Lake. Well, heart rate is all over places. Some people increase more than others between going up and down altitude. Plus coffee, hydration, they change the heart rate, you know. If you work in the morning, heart rate is lower than if you work after the working day. So I think it's good having a device that can do it. And this is some of the benefit we try to do with some of the workout. So because it's high intensity, you definitely get a lot of benefit for heart and lungs, like spinning classes. We focus on a cadence, so every time the coach tell you the coach has a program for each day. They say, okay, everybody now go 3 minutes for 5 times, 3 minutes power, low power 3. I want the cadence 85 to 90, and you have your cadence and you stick to that. When I keep the same power but I drop the cadence, the machine automatically increases the resistance. So we do 50, 55 RPM effort to strengthen muscle for muscular endurance. So we can go through that, and every zone, P3, P4, P5, tend to give specific adaptation, and I mentioned a few here. I'm not going to go over all of them. But that is based on science. The study that showed that working at that intensity, you got that adaptation. SFR stands for slow frequency repetition, and more to improve neuromuscular recruitment, especially the hip flexor and the upstroke, and so on. And then we do single leg drill, we do sprints. So we try to put all the elements, you know, in the block, so the hour and a half goes by really fast. So these are the point that close my talk here. So as we said, training is a process, and it's finalized to improve performance. It's not just to stay in shape. You want to get better. Training overload has to be precise. If you do too much, sometimes you don't get the same benefit if you do a little less, because you don't have time to recover, to take the benefit of that hard training. Training is multifactorial, and so there are definitely differences in how much one versus another person respond. Training improvement tend to follow the respective rules. That's why we try to use structure plans. And indoor training offers some advantages we went over. And then, you know, monitor training is necessary. So you want to see how much you improve. Normally we recommend a test every 3 to 4 months, because you don't want to keep working a zone that becoming too easy. I think that was the last slide, and this is the team I'm working with. And you know, some of these guys, you know, live in good climate, so they can ride their bike pretty much all year round. But some of this, that is Alessandro Balan, and Balan lives in Veneto. In, you know, these guys, and the one on the is Danilovic, lives in northern Switzerland. So these people do a lot of training indoor. And actually, now, because they, you know, sometimes they see it's not so difficult to do indoor when we have a program, because you can kill the time. So pros have been doing this now for a while. All right, so thank you. If you have any question. Thank you.
From a practical standpoint.
Right, if you have an average cyclist that... yeah, no, that's a good question. Depend on the starting level. So say, for example, an average rider like me that rides, say, 3 to 5 hours a week. So I'm not racing at this level. And maybe I climb, you know, around 220 watts. So if I improve 10, 12%, 20 watts is 2 miles an hour going uphill. If I lose some weight, I can probably gain better, but more speed. But on the flat, normally every 15, 20 watts, you gain 1.5 miles an hour. So, you know, if you're a time trialist that runs an hour, 40 kilometers, if you improve 12%, you cut 6, 8 minutes, which is, you know, could be set to finish 50+%. You finish the top 30%. But then you should do like I do. I ride by myself. When I realized I was below a certain level, I say, you know, why to suffer every time, get humiliated? You know, going out with this guy that trained 20 hours a week. So, you know, and the class, that is the cool thing in the class. And that we have classes that, you know, if you walk in, you say, wow, these people have nothing in common. We got some very fit people. You got girls or guys that are, you know, in their late 20s, early 30s. That we got 2 professional triathletes, a couple semi-pro cyclists. This guy pushed 250 to 300 watts in their power 3. And, you know, And then you got guys like me. We have a couple ladies that are in their 70s. One, she did the Leadville 100. She completed. I think she got top 3 in her age group. And and maybe she's working under 20 watts, while these people are working at 250. But relatively, when they're working, you can see that they're doing the same effort so they're suffering the same. And, you don't have to show your power to the person next to you because they can see it. So you know that you're working as hard as a top athlete, and then nobody's going to drop you in the Computrainer. So you can relax. You just focus on your own performance. And Computrainer now they have those 3D videos that really help if you're by yourself. But still, the problem, you still don't get the maximum out of the time you put in, because if I have my intervals, I know that I trigger all the mechanisms I want to train. If you put up the Aldo S, normally you start easy to warm up, and then at the end you kill yourself. And you tend to do that every time you climb the Aldo S. So you don't really balance how hard, how easy you go. So I think the best is to do a combination. For me, the best is to do the intensity indoor in a group setting, knowing your zones and make sure that you stick to those zones. And then you do the volume and you do the group ride outside. You enjoy the outside. You got maybe the extra 20, 30 watts to make you feel better in the group. So that, I think, is the balance. That is what these classes are trying to help with, not making just doing 2 classes a week become a state champion. But, I can tell you that this year I'm not teaching classes. I mean, I got different schedule, but I was teaching a class in the evening for 2 years in a row. And the first year, I remember my first ride outside, we go out from Parsi, there is a little hill, sometimes it looks like a big hill, going to Camas. And I remember that very first time that I was keeping down on my gear because I couldn't believe that I was in that gear. Because normally I'm at the top of my cock, so I was kind of in the middle. So again, 2-3 teeth in my going up the climb. And I was feeling very good, the first outdoor ride. And then I realized, and the Computrainer, the fact that you keep engaged in the crank arm, because there is no momentum. On the road, when you're on the flat, in the group especially, you engage the crank arm maybe 30, 60 degrees only. You push down, it's impulse to stay, especially if you're very good. You can do well because you know how to control the cadence. And inside, you cannot do that. You cannot use the draft of the one in front of you. And you have to keep engaging. Then when you go outside and you start to realize that the crank arm feels easy, you gain speed. It's much easier to maintain speed because you have been challenging by something more difficult indoor. So there are a lot of benefits, Any other question? All right, thank you. That was great. Thanks a lot.